Hello, Andrew.
Hey Bob, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm a little bleary-eyed. I was up late going down the JFK assassination rabbit hole. We
Oh,
can we
you're
can
still
get.
on that. Oh man.
We're hoping it'll culminate this afternoon when I tape a podcast with Jefferson Morley, noted authority on this subject, and that'll air a few days after this one. We may get back to this. I find it hard to not talk about it. Once you're in the rabbit hole, it's all consuming.
Yeah, I imagine. I didn't know you were taping that today. That's cool. I'll watch that. I'm kind of in lieu of our usual opening chit chat. I have a visual icebreaker. Do you know who this is?
No, I don't. It looks like a white male of the kind who is a member of the patriarchy.
He
Who
is a
would that?
patriarch.
He looks
He
like he
is
should be
white.
deposed. When the revolution comes, I want him to bite the dust. But who is he?
I'll give you a hint. It's a congressman. You've seen the picture before.
Yeah.
This is Steve Scalise. Can you
Did
guess
Mickey
why?
did Mickey show me that picture once?
Exactly. That's
Oh
why I'm
shit.
showing it. Actually,
See, this is what happens when you get to be my age. It's like they keep showing you Steve Scalise, and you're like, who is that?
well, don't worry. It wasn't recent. Actually, it was a year ago. That's why I'm showing
Okay.
it now. This is the picture that Mickey Cal showed you at your year-end extravaganza last year. The reason he showed it is because he confidently predicted that Scalise was going to be named Speaker of the House. And, Mickey Kaus is a very astute political observer, but that prediction didn't quite bear out. It almost did. It could have done, but it did not. So one reason I wanted to show you this is just to remind us to possibly do some predictions. I'd like to hear some of your predictions for the new year. But the main reason was just to kind of draw attention to the fact that Mickey is not here for this year-end edition in 2023. So just I wanted to
He,
ask,
he's
where
he's
where is
not.
Mickey?
Yes, you are not Mickey Kaus. We should make that
I'm
clear
not.
at the beginning. You're Andrew Day. I'm Robert Wright, publisher of the Non-Zero newsletter. You're a collaborator on particularly the Friday edition of the newsletter. And this Friday podcast is something that we've been doing most Fridays for the last few months, just by way of kind of recapping and expanding on what's in the Friday newsletter, because the Friday newsletter is a lot of little things. So it's a good kind of foundation for talking about news events broadly. So that's what this is. It happens most Fridays. Um, as uh, as for Mickey, yeah, I asked him if he wanted to do a year-end thing. He said no. However, we're going to tape one in, I think, a couple of weeks, right before the Iowa caucuses. As of now, he thinks he will actually be in Iowa,
Mm,
reporting from the ground. And we're going to tape one a few days before that, posted a couple of days before the caucuses. That's the plan. If
mm-hmm.
it doesn't happen, I'm pretty sure I won't be the one to blame. So, folks, you know where to direct your wrath if that doesn't show up in your podcast feed. Um, but it sounds like he's going to make it happen. So yeah, that's the now, there's actually a natural bridge between that and the JFK assassination, because the thing about Mickey is he was an all-purpose conspiracy theory assessor.
Mm-hmm.
You could just throw a conspiracy theory that most people haven't heard of at him, and chances are he'd have a take on it. Um, but now that I'm not doing the regular podcast with Mickey, I have to turn to actual experts. That's why I'm taping one with Jeff Morley later today. And last night I talked my wife and the one daughter who's visiting us into watching this. It was a 10-year-old Frontline, PBS Frontline thing on Lee Harvey Oswald. It was actually quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And, flirted, I mean, as mainstream stuff goes, highlighted some of the weird stuff that certainly leaves us continuing to wonder about the possible role of CIA, organized crime, and anti-Castro zealots, possibly all three working in collaboration,
Hmm.
possible role in the assassination. And that's what I'm going to talk to Jeff about, that and various open questions about the thing.
Cool. I'll check that out. So, and then you're going to be talking to Mickey, you said, in mid-January, right before the Iowa caucuses.
That is the plan. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay,
So
so even though we don't have a newsletter this week, maybe we can start by talking about the one last week, in which the non-zero newsletter, and more specifically you, Robert Wright, named ChatGPT 4 the person of the year. And you kind of framed this announcement as making up for an error of judgment on the part of Time magazine, which named,
Yeah.
of course, Taylor Swift person of the year. So Bob, why is ChatGPT 4 Enzian's person of the year?
Well, I'm one of the few people old enough to have a clear recollection of when Time magazine in 1982 departed from the person of the year format and named the desktop computer the machine of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, they could have, it would have been funny to give it to ChatGPT, but this time call it not like machine of the year, software of the year, person of the year, because that's the whole point. We've finally gotten to a point where you can actually have a pretty extended conversation with it, where it seems kind of like a real person. Also, I mean, I'm a big believer in, of course, the importance of AI, and I talked a little about that and the how there's going to be a certain amount of coverage of AI in the newsletter going forward. I'm writing a book about AI, and I explained all that in the newsletter. But also, I was kind of reacting against giving the nod to Taylor Swift. I mean, with all due respect, I mean, she's obviously some kind of powerful cultural force that I don't comprehend at all. And I'm about to turn to you for expert commentary on Taylor Swift, since although you may know nothing at all about her, you're in the demographic that probably should, Andrew. And I'm not. So I have that alibi. But there's so much important going on in the world right now, certainly including AI. So to give the nod to, I think the calculation must have been, well, this will get some clicks and maybe actually sell some physical magazines. I assume that's still part of the business model at Time. But I don't know. So what is the deal with Taylor? Like, every once in a while I'll listen to one of her songs. I couldn't name a song, but every once in a while I listen to one of these songs and I go, yeah, that's fine. It sounds like the other stuff that's also fine by other people. Like, what's the deal?
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you sent me the email yesterday saying you might ask me to explain the phenomenon of Taylor Swift to you. I almost listened to some of her songs and read up on her, thinking that maybe I could actually explain it. But then I decided it's kind of more interesting that we don't know anything about her, because she's not like Michael Jackson level of stardom, but she certainly achieved a level of fame that
She's
I
kind of
thought
getting
was
there, though. And I was sensing that already. There is a lot of discussion of her, like even on tech podcasts and stuff.
right.
But go ahead.
No, she's definitely achieved a level of fame that I did not think was possible in our more fragmented culture. I mean, the place where I get my oil changed had a sign when I first moved to Asheville with, it said something about Taylor Swift. They had 2 tickets to a Taylor Swift concert, and they were running some sort of contest. If you come get an oil change, you can, be eligible to win these tickets. And so little things like that, constantly remind me how popular she is. But like you, I can't name the title of a single one of her songs. I think a lot of her appeal, and I don't know if I'm in the demographic. It seems like a very female kind of phenomenon.
No, actually, I've heard from some male Swifties. There are male Swifties.
Yeah, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, is a big Swiftie, apparently. Did you know that?
I didn't. I'm not sure I knew she was the Attorney General, but I digress. Oh, Merritt. I thought you said Mary Garland, and I was like, Mary. You know what? Okay, this gets to the other reason I'm bleary-eyed. The night before this, we stayed up watching this documentary on David Lynch and the Wizard of Oz, and they really went into the name Garland, and so Mary Garland, Judy Garland, Merritt Garland. I knew that Merritt Garland was Attorney General.
What's the connection between David Lynch and Wizard of Oz?
Well, this remains. I mean, it was a shaky premise for this thing. David Lynch once said, the day doesn't go by that he doesn't think of the Wizard of Oz, apparently. Now, mystifyingly, they don't disclose this fact till the end of the documentary. So most of the documentary sounds like these people you've mostly never heard of throwing out wild conjectures about connections between the Wizard of Oz and David Lynch's movies. It's a really not optimally done thing. The one person I'd heard of is John Waters, the director. That part was interesting. It's a series of chapters of people commenting on the Wizard of Oz and David Lynch, or the Wizard of Oz and but they never interviewed David Lynch, which raises questions about the actual stature of this documentary. Like you can't, like you're doing a whole documentary about him, you can't get him to sit down for 15 minutes.
Right. Well, I can see the dream connection, the unconscious connection, because in The Wizard of Oz,
Right.
Dorothy's experiences are kind of like symbolic expressions of her unconscious, you know?
Well, and Mulholland Drive, not to spoil the plot, but my sense was that at the end, like it's kind of all been a dream.
Right.
And yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff. Oh, there's specific reference. He definitely references the movie, and a lot of
Mhm.
people have. It's not that there's nothing there. It was just it's a weird way. Look, if you're a Lynch fan and or Wizard of Oz fan, it's a perfectly interesting thing. I forget. So it's called something like Lynch Oz or something is the name of the documentary. Anyway, I
Mhm.
digress. So 2 nights in a row I've stayed up late. That's why I can barely remember who the Attorney General is. But
Mhm.
it is not Mary Garland. It is not Judy Garland. I'm confident of those two things. It is Merrick Garland.
Right.
Okay.
As
Got it.
far as Taylor Swift's appeal, I think it just has something to do with maybe wholesomeness, which seems kind of unusual in our culture. I mean, if you think about the popular movies these days, they're oftentimes kind of bombarding your senses. They're not about, moral lessons or anything like that. I don't know exactly, but it seems like hit music is oftentimes trying to cross the line and generate
Yeah.
controversy. And Taylor Swift seems like definitely not that. And I think that holds a certain appeal.
You probably jinxed her. I mean, like within 48 hours of you calling her wholesome, she's going to be implicated in a child trafficking ring or something. But now, didn't she start off in country music?
She did.
So
Yeah.
that I think that's part of it, and it's an interesting thing. I mean, I wonder if they get into her. Does she have promise as some kind of red state, blue state unifier, or is she considered a sellout in red states, or I don't
To
know. I didn't read
I think
I might read the timepiece before I get too carried away with my critique of Time Magazine
yeah.
naming a person of the year.
To my understanding, it's a bit of she's not like a true Southerner. I think she's from like Pennsylvania or something, which kind of has a Southern vibe. But she's associated with
Well, Western
Tennessee.
Pennsylvania is very red statey.
Yeah, but she's associated with Tennessee. I guess she moved there to become a music star and references it in her music. Um, yeah, the first time I ever heard about it, because I'm from Alabama, and I remember I was like watching television with my extended family, and my cousins were really into this new song by this new artist about about not being a cheerleader and not being one of the cool kids. But maybe we can get back to AI as person of the year because I'm curious. Do you, just to be clear, you don't literally think of ChatGPT 4 as a person, do you? Or are you willing to say it's a person, like actually?
No, I'm not willing to say it's a person, actually. I mean, I am not willing to rule out the possibility that any given information processing system has sentience. It could be that sentience is something that accompanies, information processing generically. I mean, in a somewhat restricted sense,
Hmm.
you can define information processing so broadly that the whole universe is information processing. But it could be that it goes beyond the organic world. I mean, this is the big question: is consciousness kind of substrate independent? Is it a function of certain kinds of information processing generically, or do they have to be part of this carbon-based life form that we're part of, or what? I don't rule out the possibility that it feels like a little something to be my thermostat, and I mean, uh when it's warmer than we want, and the thermostat feels just a little uncomfortable until it gets the AC cranked up to a point where the temperature's right again.
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I'm mainly joking, but I don't rule, who knows? I think an underappreciated fact is that according to what is kind of implicitly the mainstream view of what consciousness is in science, and I say implicitly because most scientists don't really think about it very much. There is no way of knowing, whether any other thing is conscious. I mean,
Mhm.
ChatGPT, of course, until you put the guardrails on, it's going to say it is because it's trained on all this text written by people
Mm.
who say they are, right?
Mhm.
I mean, maybe someday they'll do an experiment where they train it on text where there's none of that, and it still says, "I swear, it's like something to be me." And we'll
Yeah.
go, okay, must be. I don't know if you could do that kind of thing, but um, now, of course, the guardrails, that put on by the kind of MSM AI people, get it to say, no, no, I'm not sentient. The
Yeah.
truth is, we just don't know. So
I mean,
anyway, that was a long answer to your question.
yeah,
So
but I think the reason I ask is because I think that they clearly are going to become increasingly good at fooling us into thinking that they're persons. I mean, assuming that they're not, right?
you
Like
mean
I
they'll have
was,
the motivation to fool us, or they'll
no, they'll
they'll
just become
they'll be
so
more lifelike?
capable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, totally. I
Ma-
mean, when you start, we're going into the metaverse, folks. Get ready. You are
I mean, I
going
was,
into the metaverse.
and it's interesting that you bring up consciousness. I mean, I was last night, I got Karina, my wife, a record player for Christmas. And last night we were listening, just like me, Karina, and the dog, to a record that we bought at the thrift store. And I was kind of funny to me, kind of watching the dog being in the room, like with us, but totally unaware of this experience that me
Yeah,
and Karina had. Because, like, Penny, the dog, she hears the sounds, and the mechanical process is quite similar in how she's processing them. If anything, her ears are better at hearing the sounds
yeah,
than ours, but she's so oblivious to this other layer that's
sure.
not like scientifically observable. But that is, what is meaningful about music. So we can actually hear the music, be carried away by it, anticipate the melodies, but Penny, despite being conscious in the sense of sentience,
Yeah.
is not privy to that kind of more spiritual level of the experience. And I think that that is what we mean by persons. Like that's
What,
one
respond to
aspect of
music
person.
like they like Taylor Swift? That's our definition. We have plumbed the entire works of Western philosophy and concluded that our definition of consciousness is liking Taylor Swift.
Exactly. No, I
Okay.
mean it's one aspect of it, like something beyond the biological. Um, at least that's kind of how I think about it. And I think that this is something that AI is, it will also get better and better in making us think that it has this ability. You can give it
Yeah.
music. It doesn't even have Penny's ability technically. It's just converting signals into numbers. Um, so it's not even really processing, it's not even really hearing or seeing in the way that, you know, biological organisms can do.
Well, we're
But
turning signals into internal physical information processing.
yeah, you might have a good point there. That's true. But I think you get my point. And what's interesting to me is you can give it text and it can analyze it like a professional literary critic.
Yeah.
You can ask it about movies and it can say insightful things already, you know. And that's the part that's interesting to me, how we're wired to see these things as persons once they achieve, a certain level of capability.
Yeah, well, there is, the term consciousness is ambiguous. Some people by it mean a human level of consciousness.
Hmm.
And some people mean self-consciousness, awareness of, and of course, those definitions tend to confine it to our species. But I think the more common definition is just, Thomas Nagel's phrase, is it like something to be you? If
Hmm.
the answer is yes, and only for sure if it is, then you are sentient. So it's having subjective experience, pleasure, pain, whatever. It's like I'm pretty sure it's like something to be my dog. I could be wrong, but that's the common definition. So
Hmm.
with that definition, appreciating music or various other uniquely or distinctively human things is not a prerequisite. It's just different. I mean, your dog is tuned in to these things that we don't think of as that significant, of course.
That's true, but my dog's not a person. I don't deny that they're conscious. I'm
Yeah.
okay with the
No, your
definition
dog's
of
definitely not a
consciousness.
person.
Yeah.
We agree
I
on
guess
that.
another aspect of personhood, I guess, would be like ability to be accountable, held accountable. Like you can generate obligations on yourself socially by saying you're going to do something. Like if I was late for today's podcast and I just said, "Oh well, I'm usually late because I like to sleep in, and this happened. I
Yeah.
got too drunk last night." That wouldn't be an acceptable description of why
No,
I was late.
no, but it would still be a human-like behavior. The world is
Hmm.
full of these people.
Right.
None of them work for me.
um,
Some
but
have.
do you
uh,
want to talk about this New York Times situation? It's quite a big story that broke
yeah,
yesterday.
it's funny. So the New York Times sued OpenAI and Microsoft, and it's weird. I mean, obviously there are all these copyright infringement issues in principle that are fascinating. Like because what the AI does is it does draw on all of this text it's trained on, all these images it's trained on. And one question you could ask is like, okay, right there, if that's going into your output, is that fair? Okay, that's an interesting question for you to not ask our permission, even if it's copyright material, for you to not pay us. And that's what these companies did. That's an interesting question. And then there's an interesting question raised by, which, by the way, I'm not sure that is a question raised by the time suit. I'll get to that. But there's also the interesting question of raised by some things that may have turned into lawsuits in the image generation part of AI, where you can say, you know, give me, show me a picture of an English mansion done in the style of so and so. Well, is it copyright infringement on the work of so and so if they have a very distinctive look, and some of these painters do, and like anyone who knows the field would look at that and go, "Oh, that must have been done by so and so." Is that
Mhm.
copyright infringement? Because you did train on some of their stuff, and now you're generating stuff that looks like it could have been done by then. Okay, that's an interesting question. But the funny thing is about the New York Times thing is that the examples I've seen, and I haven't read the whole New York Times read, but the examples that are getting all the play are where like ChatGPT takes whole paragraphs almost verbatim from the New York Times. And so far as I can tell, that takes a very distinctive and unusual kind of prompt. The examples I've seen, the prompt is just like about 20, 30 words taken verbatim from the New York Times. So it's like you take the first 25 words of the story, that's your prompt. And since what GPT does is predict what's likely to come next based on what it's seen, well, as it happens, that exact 25 words it has seen, but it's only seen it once. And when it's seen it, what happens next is what follows is this paragraph from the New York Times.
Hmm.
So all of the examples I've seen are where this very weird prompt leads it to generate this verbatim text for the Times, and I think that almost never happens. I mean, I assume that the lawsuit is raising the broader issues as well, or it's not going to be very interesting. But anyway, right now, that's what's getting the attention. And on NPR this morning, they said that verbatim stuff, I mean, they didn't mention the fact that it takes a weird prompt to get it, but the NPR said that verbatim stuff is the heart of the lawsuit. I don't know. If so, that's really weird. Because I think almost no one is generating these verbatim paragraphs from the New York Times when they use ChatGPT. So I don't know what we'll see. To me, that's not a very interesting question.
I mean, maybe intellectual property is the claim that's going to be litigated, and that's what they can sue them for violating. But I think also a concern is just web traffic. Like it used to be the case that if you want to read
Yeah.
about an event or an issue, you have to go to the New York Times issue from that date, that time period, and possibly pay up because it might be paywalled. But now you can just go to ChatGPT as a kind of workaround. Like it's trained on that New York Times article, and you can just ask it. And I imagine New York Times is worried about I mean, they've carved out this nice, little corner of the internet or big corner of the internet, in the digital age. But I think that that's being challenged now by
Yeah,
AI.
yeah. Um, yeah, I gotta think it's a more kind of general kind of insecurity. I mean, it could just be a tactic. They had been in negotiation, I think, with OpenAI and or Microsoft about getting some kind of compensation. They didn't, whatever they were hoping to get was not forthcoming, and so they turned to the courts.
Hmm.
I don't know, but very interesting issue. And of all the ways to slow AI down, like this would be one. Like if you say, okay, the existing frontier models, large language models, are illegal because they trained on all this copyright stuff and didn't pay up.
Hmm.
But then you got to ask what happens with Chinese AI. Did they train on these Western copyrighted texts? B, can they be held accountable?
Hmm.
In so many ways, AI kind of screams for uh, regulation at the international level, if there's going to be any regulation at all, which I think there should be. But if there's
Hmm.
going to be very effective regulation, it's hard to confine it to the national level. That's one reason. Uh, AI just hits kind of the mission of the non-zero newsletter in so many ways, and that's one of them. Is we're interested in all the issues that kind of call for international governance if they're going to be handled effectively, and in some cases, the idea is they'll be very, very, very dangerous if not handled that way, like biotech. And AI is right up there with biotech, I think, both in terms of the potential peril and the difficulty of regulation.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I would say for me, this intellectual property claim or lawsuit that the New York Times is filing, I don't just see it as a way to slow down OpenAI and get some regulation out of fear of some other things that are going to happen. I think it actually touches on like some of my main concerns about AI. Like in this case, it relates to just this kind of general dumbing down of culture that I fear is going to happen, where research going forward is increasingly just going to be opening up ChatGPT and just asking it questions. And kind of the craft of research of seeking out different sources is going to be lost. And in some ways, that's already been happening with Google. Um, Michel Houellebecq, this French author, when he was asked what he thought what the effect on society of COVID was going to be, he said it'll be the same, only worse after after the pandemic. And I kind of think the same thing is true
Wait,
about
what'll be
AI
the same?
society. Like he writes a lot about like the atomization of society and like ennui
So he's
and the
saying
West.
problems attributed to COVID are going to only persist and deepen.
Yeah, he was basically making it's kind of like a play on words. The interviewer is asking him at the beginning of the pandemic, how will things be at the end of this? How much will things change? And how will they change? And he just said, it's going to be the same, only a little worse. Like this will
Yeah,
be an accelerant
it is.
for
Yeah, well, it
mm,
was in many ways for natural trends like working at home.
right.
Yeah.
And I think AI is kind of an accelerant as well. A lot of the things like if you think about like AI generated music, it's kind of a continuation of how corporations, relate to music and, like, focus group things and basically use technology to create music that is fine-tuned to be appealing to some kind of, like, animal part of ourselves. So AI generating songs, generating a rock song is not that different from what came before. It is different, but I see it as part of kind of a continuation with technological trends preceding it. And I think the same thing with this research thing I was mentioning. Like Google has already kind of probably made us lazier as researchers. I think OpenAI or ChatGPT or whatever the next iteration of chatbots is gonna do the same thing.
Yeah, although it depends on what you mean by lazy. If you mean I don't any longer have to get up and walk to a library and it's lazy not to get up and walk, maybe, but you know, it certainly increased the efficiency of research. I can learn a lot more, a lot faster. I mean, one thing I'm realizing is that search had been becoming more AI like. It's
Mhm.
like it's like ChatGPT forced me to realize you can just ask Google reasonably complicated questions. I mean, the backdrop was like, I don't know, 20 years ago or something. There was a search engine called Ask Jeeves. Do you remember
Mhm.
this? And the whole
Yeah.
premise was you can ask it questions. Google, you can only put in search words. Us, you can ask questions, which was true. You could ask them, you just couldn't get them answered. It sucked. But back then, Google, it's true, you couldn't ask it questions. And I realized actually for several years now, it's been increasingly the case. You just ask it the question. And now, of course, Google's trying to really press on the accelerator and make it much more like that so that AI, even though it's, of course, developing its own AI per se, its own chatbots, it wants to minimize the threat posed to its search model by AI, meanwhile.
Mhm.
So it's trying to accelerate that. But, the line, I guess I now more see more continuity between AI and just kind of the existence of the World Wide Web. Because,
Mhm.
the thing about AI that I think people didn't anticipate about the LLMs is the extent to which it is just our collective mind. It draws on all of this stuff that all of these people have generated. And, you know, a few years ago, you could have eventually gotten to roughly the information it will give you by spending a lot more time scouring the web. That's what it's kind of, in a certain oblique sense, doing for you. It's just way more efficient, and that business of scouring the web, that itself was a revolution. I mean,
Mhm.
I had a job in journalism where if I wanted information, I could just look around my room and it was all either there or I didn't have it. It was in books, it was in
Mhm.
physical form, or I didn't have it. And I had to call somebody or go to a library or something. And so the web itself was, I think, as big a step beyond that as AI is beyond the web itself, but there is a continuity there.
Yeah.
So, uh, but the other thing is it's going to happen faster. It
Mm.
is, things are being accelerated, and the web itself has, of course, been disorienting, and we haven't even recovered from the web, let alone social media, a much more recent manifestation of the web. So, but I'm surprised that are you sure you're not my age? You're saying these kinds of things as somebody my age should say, like, why, when I was a boy, got up and walked to the library.
Well, as you were saying, this change is happening so much faster that,
Right.
these
It's making
generational
everyone an
divides are
old
going.
person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the generational divides can maybe emerge faster. I will clarify, it's not necessarily laziness that I'm worried about in the thing I was saying earlier. It's also this just dependence on one, like, tech entity for all your research, and the possible control that they can exert, in that regard. Like, I think you've heard, like, Google has, it ranks search results and really impacts what you click, and kind of guides you in that way. And I think that there are problems there. But do you wanna talk about Russia Ukraine? There's some news there.
Sure. I mean, the year intake is, I mean, I hate to sound like this, but this was the year that the non-zero newsletter turned out to be right. I mean, you know, and Mark Milley, I mean, credit where due. He was chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff in, I think, November of last year, maybe. He said, "Look, Ukraine has had these two big successes, one in Kherson and the other in Kharkiv, but those are for distinctive reasons, and we shouldn't expect the battlefield position to radically improve. It may be time to cut a peace deal." I don't know how explicitly he said all this, but he kind of let it be known that that was his feeling. I mean, there's some, he's not really supposed to be making policy declaration. He's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he's supposed to just do whatever the president says, which is what he does, but he made his views known. Um, And I think we should remember how thoroughly people who said things like that were shouted down by the Michael McFalls of the world, uh, who said they would never rest until all of Ukraine was liberated, which would be great. But could we just sit down and do the math? Russia has way more people to turn into soldiers than Ukraine. Ukraine's going to run out of them, which it's now doing. Um, and Russia has this huge indigenous capacity to make weapons, whereas Ukraine is dependent on these countries whose politics are fluid for its ongoing supply of weapons and ammo. Both of these things made it obvious that it was very risky for Ukraine to persist in hopes of further gains rather than cut a deal. And all signs are that we don't know for sure, but that Putin would have been able to talk, would have been willing to talk about a deal. There's all kinds of reasons it was hard for Ukraine to do this politically, but one reason is we didn't push him. We didn't say, "Hey, President Zelensky, you need to start preparing your people. You need to start telling them, first of all, the truth about how many people are dying and just how, how challenging things are, and quit putting a gloss on everything. And you need to start floating ideas like maybe we're not going to get all our territory back." We should have pushed him to do that. But Biden didn't. And of course, he's not pushing Israel in any way that anybody can see to wind down that set of hostilities. Even though Israel's now killed like 15 times as many civilians as Israeli civilians died on October 7th. And there's kind of risk being generated in many places by the ongoing hostilities. So anyway, back to Ukraine. That's the world has apparently finally woken up to this. I don't know if Michael McFall has. We have, of course, as you know, in the latest issue, in last Friday's issue. Now, this Friday, the newsletter's not happening because it is the holiday, in the middle of the holidays. And that's one reason we're taping this instead of last week. But, you know, everyone's getting the picture that Ukraine is playing defense. And in fact, they just lost a non-trivial village. I mean, a town, I guess. I'm not paying nearly as close attention as I was. I'm being distracted by Gaza. But what is it? It's like Marinka or something, or
Marinka, it's in the Donetsk Oblast, so it's an eastern town. I think it had like somewhere on the order of 10,000 people,
before
before the war. And
that's the biggest. I think I don't think anything. Not many things that big have changed hands since Bakhmut, which was bigger than that, which was like big, much bigger, like 70,000 pre-war population, I think. But
yeah, that's what people are comparing it to. And actually, the news out of Ukraine this week, I see it as kind of an opportunity to now go down the right path, to do the things that people like you have been advocating for the past year or so. Because, the Ukrainian Air Force struck a Russian warship at port in Crimea. And then hours later, the Ukrainian military retreated from the town of Marinka, as we were just saying. And I wish they hadn't lost Marinka. But if they are going to lose it, it's kind of good that it happens at the same time, I think, as this situation with with the Russian warship in Crimea, because it really drives home the point that, Ukraine's not going to take Crimea. They're struggling to hold on to the territory that they currently hold. And so the military value of this strike on this warship, it's only in the context of kind of preparing the ground for peace talks. Like, that's the only strategic purpose I can see it serving. Like, getting Putin and other Russian elites to consider that this is actually not good for them either, the continuation of this war. They're suffering losses and, embarrassments. And so I do see this as a pretty significant event, striking down this warship. I don't know what the extent of the damage is. But these kinds of things should be thought of in terms of potential leverage, I think.
yeah,
Otherwise,
I
they're
mean,
pointless.
I think the timing may not be a coincidence, first of all.
Mhm.
Um, this war has been conducted with an unusual degree of attention to public relations. There are people who think, I mean, the whole summer offensive reports were that, beyond a point at least, the military was saying, look, we got to stop. And for political reasons, they kept going. Um, the and I noticed that the publicity about the significant loss of this town, Marinka, tended to be a kind of, well, the two were reported as one.
Yeah.
Some people led with Ukraine hitting this ship, some led with the village, but everybody was saying, well, okay, there was good news and bad news today. And I think Ukraine may have decided they were going to work hard to take out a ship right before they announced the withdrawal from Marinka.
Mm-hmm.
But in any event, I agree with you that as it becomes, and it isn't just that they're not going to retake Crimea, they're not going to get back much of the kind of post 2014 Ukraine that's now occupied by Russia, I think, much of any, and they may be lucky not to lose more territory. And I agree with you. This thought occurred to me that maybe the Biden administration does have the power to give them weapons that will, if you ask, well, how is Ukraine going to maintain any bargaining position if Russia is on the march in Ukraine proper? The answer may be that Biden gives them longer range missiles and helps them with the targeting and gives them explicit permission to use them on certain kinds of targets that Russia considers valuable. And that's the way you'll bring Russia to the table, even as Russia is gaining ground in Ukraine. Now, one of the risks is, a number of these strikes. I don't know about this strike, but some of the strikes on, I think the Russian Navy has now withdrawn from the western coast of Crimea. Do you know, after a number of strikes on those ships months ago?
That sounds familiar. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think, some of the assaults on Russia's Crimean Navy were coming from Odessa. Possible downside of that is Russia says, well, we need to control Odessa, which has been in their sights. Odessa, Russia considers like one of the kind of more Russian parts of Ukraine. So, there's possible downsides here. But I agree with you that we may be seeing the formula that gets Russia to the table, even if they are making advances on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope so. What do you want to talk about these state level efforts to take Trump off the ballot?
Let me just quickly say one more thing about Gaza. The latest alarming news, look, the ongoing thing in Gaza is just alarming. And I don't think it's in Israel's interest. I don't think it's in anybody's interest, honestly. I'm trying to think. Maybe it's in the interest of whoever maybe winds up leading the radical movement that's likely to emerge from the ashes. Because I just don't think you can create so many people in Gaza whose relatives and friends have been killed or maimed by Israel without planting the seeds for another generation of violent resistance. But the latest specifically alarming thing is Ukraine is now saying that if Hezbollah even keeps up the level of attacks on Israel that we've been seeing, which I think have been somewhat measured, kind of not like random and there's been an understanding, I think, that it's kind of a tit for tat thing. Hezbollah needs to show support for Hamas but they're not getting out of control. But I think as I take Israel's latest messaging, it's that, look, if they even keep up the current level, we're going to escalate.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little alarming. I would say that one thing about both the Ukraine war and this war is that there's been concern about escalation. I've been concerned about, well, vertical escalation in the case of Ukraine, meaning nuclear weapons, and horizontal escalation in the sense of it widening regionally. And in the Middle East, has been concerned about horizontal escalation. That it by and large has not happened yet, notwithstanding how much kind of flirting with it there's been, right? Like the Houthis hitting ships, these groups in Iraq hitting American troops, strikes from Syria on America. It's like all the, there's kind of potentially explosive stuff everywhere, but it never explodes into a true conflagration.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of wondering, does the modern information environment make it easier to do the kind of careful signaling that keeps things under control? I just don't know, but and I should just knock on wood, I'm sure. But so far, neither of those things has boiled over in a big way. But I think there is inherently some degree of risk, and it's one of the many reasons I think the U.S. should be applying leverage on Israel
Mm-hmm.
to wind it down.
And it kind of sounded like this warning from Israel. Was it official, like the government was saying it, or was it just some minister speaking out of turn?
I don't know. Got a lot of play. Let me I'll be looking it up. And if you want, we can move to other stuff. Israel warning raises prospect of a broader war. This is the New York Times. Well, a war cabinet member. Okay, well, that's like there's only like 4 or 5 people in the war cabinet, right?
Yeah, that
So,
sounds serious.
well, it's Benny Gantz, who's almost kind of the number 2 person because he's the big rival of Netanyahu.
Right now, he's just like a minister in parliament, right? But I guess you just said he's part of the war cabinet, so this new like coalition government, he has a big role in, I guess.
Yeah, he does. His quote is, "If the world and the Lebanese government don't act in order to prevent the firing on Israel's northern residents," which has become a ritual. It's just, and he goes on to say, "and to distance Hezbollah from the border, the IDF will do it." So that's the quote.
So the warning is like delivered to Lebanon, like the government, like you need
Yeah,
to
it sounds
get.
like it's also, what does he say? If the world and the Lebanese government don't, so he would like us to put pressure on Lebanon, I guess.
Mhm. I don't know if they have the capability to do this. I mean, Hezbollah is kind of the government in Lebanon, or like a second government, isn't it?
Well, I don't know that much about Lebanese
Mm.
politics. I mean, I know it's concerned enough about its standing within Lebanon to not want to be blamed for massive casualties. But he may mean partly other elements of the Lebanese government, non-Hezbollah elements of the Lebanese government. He may
Yeah.
be saying they need to, yeah, that may be one of the intended audiences. So yeah, where did you want to?
Well, I was kind of curious to get your reaction to this Trump-related news. We don't have to talk about it long, but this week the Michigan Supreme Court allowed Trump to remain on the ballot in the primaries, at least. I believe they left open the possibility that someone else can challenge his eligibility in the general election, assuming he becomes the nominee. And then, of course, last week, Colorado's top court ruled that he should be removed from the ballot in the primaries. And I believe they even did this whole thing where they basically kind of worked out that he did commit insurrection. So the legal rationale, of course, is that the 14th Amendment, I believe, disqualifies people who are engaged in insurrection or rebellion. That was a product of the Civil War.
Yeah,
And challenges to Trump's eligibility in other states, Maine and Oregon, I've heard are still pending. And I just was curious to get your reaction to this because it seems pretty important.
yeah. I mean, on the one hand, I thought the Colorado ruling wasn't crazy. I personally think if you're gonna argue that he was part of an insurrection, the thing to focus on is that one tweet about how Mike Pence, whatever it was, betrayed us, betrayed his country, whatever. at that point, Trump was watching thing on TV. I think it's pretty clear he knew there were already people inside the Capitol. He was certainly seeing the Capitol besieged. He knew Mike Pence was in there. He knew that they were in the process of certifying the next, it was the culmination of the process by which we peacefully select our leaders. So he knew that any more riling up of the crowd threatened to derail the constitutionally ordained process for transferring power peacefully. So can you argue that he's playing a role in insurrection? I think you can. Now, that said, I don't think it's a healthy thing for people to be using, let me just say, a worry about the consequences of people using the courts to, kind of derail his presidential bid, because this is just the way countries descend, how the rule of law falls apart and countries descend into what ultimately becomes not just bitter strife, but conceivably even violent civil war. In any event, it can be a descent into banana republicism. And, both sides always think the way they're abusing the courts is valid, right? And it may be valid. I mean, but still, it's a tit for tat thing where, okay, we try this, and now Trump, if he wins the election, he starts, trying to exploit instruments of government, maybe including the courts, in ways that haven't been done before, and he thinks that's legitimized by what we tried to do with him through the courts, and of course he defines all the prosecutions of him as part of that, and so on. So I worry about that. Now, I do think that if this reaches the Supreme Court, like the Colorado thing, which I guess there's still some chance of, I'm not following it that closely, I think the Supreme Court will rule in favor of Trump. And of course, Democrats, especially #resistance people, will lament that. But I personally think that if Trump tries any really egregious subversion of the Constitution while in power, assuming he gets reelected, I do think that the Supreme Court, though majority conservative, will impede that if it can. And and in a way, one thing you could say to console yourself if you're a Democrat who is in anguish over some future Supreme Court overturning of the Colorado thing is that by overturning the Colorado thing, the Supreme Court will be burnishing its credentials in the eyes of Trumpists. So it'll make it easier to thwart any big authoritarian bid by Trump if he's president, while minimizing the antagonizing of his base. I think that's one. I mean, if you're just grasping for straws, looking for reason to cheer yourself up, because I do think the Supreme Court will not sustain the Colorado court decision, and I do think the Supreme Court will not support Trump in some just egregious bid for authoritarian abuse and subversion of the Constitution.
Right. And so you think that the Supreme Court will overturn the Colorado Supreme Court decision? But you think that on the basis of like legal argument or for political reasons? Like you don't think the 14th Amendment correctly applies in this situation?
I don't know enough to say. I mean, I'm not a legal scholar, but I think you could make a it seems to me you could make a case. Now, I mean, I don't know, that one tweet I've always thought is kind of the heart of the matter, because if you look at the speech Trump delivered before, there's the "to be sure we should do it peacefully," blah blah blah, and other people tend not to emphasize that tweet as much as I always have. I've always thought it should have been the entire basis for Twitter banning Trump. If you read Twitter's justification for banning Trump back when they did pre-Musk, it's just total gibberish. It's like, what? It's just a fog bank of
Mhm.
verbiage. That's what I would have done. But so I don't know about the legal scholarship. And I think the political calculation will loom large. I mean, look, I think it did back when the Supreme Court basically decided the election between the contest between Bush and Gore in favor of Bush. A lot of people think that was a dubious decision.
Mhm.
Um, whether that calculation was one of partisan politics or more kind of judicious, just wanting to bring this to closure before things got out of hand, I don't know, but it doesn't seem to have been clearly grounded in sound legal reasoning. And
Mhm.
I think, they'll think about the politics for sure. You would almost want them to. I mean, right? It's like you would want them to be thinking about the future of the republic as they make the decision.
Right.
Uh, so,
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably more critical of the Democrats and like the liberal establishment on this issue than you seem to be. I mean, it seems to me that there's a kind of Schmittian logic. If you know this, he's always called this Nazi theorist, Carl Schmitt. To my understanding, he actually earlier in his career was worried about the Nazis, and he was arguing that Germany should take anti-democratic means to prevent this party from gaining power because it'll destroy uh,
hmm.
the Constitution. Um, and it kind of goes with his ideas of politics being between the friend and enemy. Like that's the fundamental distinction in politics. And I see the liberal establishment as taking a similar view to Trump. And it seems to me that we're heading toward a constitutional crisis potentially, because like one party sees Trump, and maybe Trump is a threat to democracy, and then the Democrats apparently, in my reading, are willing to relax their liberal principles in order to make sure he can't be president. You know, um, I think it's pretty egregious
No,
taking
I
him
kind of
off.
agree. I mean, remember, I mean, the predecessor of the non-zero newsletter was the Mindful Resistance newsletter. The
Yeah,
idea was the resistance was not proceeding judiciously with careful calculation. They were reacting emotionally and, with more self righteousness than was warranted. And of course, that's human nature. But when it's counterproductive, you need to fight it. And no, I think you're right. They're like, our use of the courts is fine. It's their use of the courts that's not fine. I mean, both sides are saying that.
but how have Republicans used the courts in like on this level? Like, I can't think of any examples.
Uh, well, I just mean they will. Uh, well, first of all, I mean there were attempts by the Republicans to use the courts and maybe in overturning the election, and maybe I mean they were particularly dubious. That's true,
Hmm.
but I mean there are cases where uh I mean you see this with bias in coverage.
Hmm.
That coverage is biased. Can you believe what Fox News is doing? And they just don't realize that not only MSNBC, but the New York Times was back in the heyday of the resistance doing pretty egregiously anti-Trump bias in the way it reported news.
Right.
You see this a lot, and I'm anticipating like the way this plays out if like if we do have we being anti-Trump forces have this success in the courts, like and they then manage to have their successes. Well, I mean, in a way, the Michigan thing is an example. So they a challenge kind of like the Colorado one. They succeeded in Colorado, failed in Michigan. I mean, even there, they will look at the Michigan thing and say that was a bad ruling. That was a bad
Hmm.
ruling. The Colorado one was a good ruling. And all they mean is our side won once and our side lost one. They don't know. They don't know anything about legal scholarship. 99% of the people opining on this, they're like me. Um, and so you see it even there, but I'm saying if there is the next round of descent into banana republicanism,
Hmm.
um, and it's a wave of it's court rulings in favor of Trump or whatever, or maybe it's his use of the Justice Department in ways that actually aren't that different from the way Democrats used the Justice Department to prosecute him. Just expect the symmetry to be lost on almost everyone.
Mm-hmm.
That's
but
the
not
problem.
not the non-zero newsletter.
Not the non-zero newsletter. Mm. We are nothing if not symmetrical. So what else? Oh, did you say we were going to have to make predictions?
We can end with predictions.
Well, I hate to predict it, but I predict that Trump will be the next president. I think that's, I mean, certainly between Biden and Trump, there's always a chance it's weird shit can happen when you got two candidates this old, especially Biden. And so there, you know, I would say the chances that it'll be Trump or Biden are only like 96%. But if you divide that 96% up, I think Trump has one more percentage point than Biden in terms of chances of being the next president. More than one, I'm afraid to say, because I you know, I've been saying for some time, as you know, get Biden off the stage.
Yeah.
And by the way, I would just say LBJ in a somewhat comparable situation. Country was torn. War was part of the reason. Currently, that's the Middle Eastern war that we're not directly involved in, but the Vietnam War was the reason. Everybody thought he was going to run. He just said, look, I'm bowing out for the good of the country. Whether that was the entirety of his motivation is another question. Whether it worked out well for the country is another question, but there is precedent for someone stepping down gracefully, even when they are not on the verge of flat out undeniable senility, which I think Biden is. So,
well, I'll take the opposite prediction. I think Biden's going to be elected.
Okay, let's bet even money.
Okay.
How much? How much should we bet? Or should it be non-monetary?
Well, can we have some caveats? Like, assuming they actually run against each other on election day, I think Biden will be elected. I'll bet you $100.
Whoa. It's a lot of money.
It is.
Why, when I was a boy, you know how much Oswald paid for his rifle? The rifle that apparently was used to shoot Kennedy?
I don't.
It was like $12.95 or something.
And the CIA bought it for him.
You could get a rifle for that kind of what?
And the CIA bought it for him.
I don't know. This is where I'm looking forward to talking to Jeff. This is where it gets mysterious. But
what's some other things we can predict? Obviously, the election's the main one. But do you think that there's going to be a peace deal for Russia-Ukraine this year?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or including an armistice?
I think there will be a cessation of hostilities. I would say only slightly more than 50%, but I think the chances are better than 50%.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like a formal, like an armistice.
Because for one thing, I think it's very much in Biden's political interest. And it would be in his political interest to wind the Middle East thing up, but not if he is seen. If he's seen as pressuring Israel to do something that's not in its interest, even though this would be, then that has a political cost with a constituency he's very concerned about. So, but I think Ukraine, it's mainly upside if he can just, well, I mean, maybe the best case is cessation of hostilities. It doesn't become a firm peace deal, because once it's a firm peace deal, he'll be accused of appeasement, because Russia will inevitably keep some Ukrainian territory. So I guess the political optimal for him is peace, but not a final deal.
Maybe for Zelensky as well. For Zelensky as well, that might be optimal.
Yeah. So I think that will probably happen. I hope so.
Can you think of any other things? Maybe a third prediction?
Dallas Cowboys will again not win the Super Bowl.
Okay, we agree on that one too.
I would just like to get people to re-examine that the call, 10 years ago, whenever they played Green Bay in the NFC Finals, which was in effect a reliving of the Ice Bowl from 66 or 67, which I watched live. I'd like people to revisit the call on that Des Bryant catch at the end. I mean, we was fucking robbed. That was just highway fucking robbery, and that would have made all the difference. But I digress. Cowboys won't win the Super Bowl. Who will though? It's really unclear. Do you follow football?
Not this year. No.
I don't
So I have
follow
no
it
idea.
closely,
Mm.
but there's no overwhelming favorite, I think.
Mm. I've always watched NBA more than NFL.
Yeah, have you been keeping it's I mean, it's hard to watch the Spurs since they so rarely win, but have you watched Wemby at all?
Yeah, I mean, at least highlights. Yeah, he's amazing.
Highlights is the way to watch him.
Yeah.
He'll be interesting though. Okay, we digress. So, people should subscribe to the Non-Zero newsletter. They should rate and review us. We say that much too rarely. It matters. It matters. Okay, the hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the very top of our needs, the newsletters, is for you to become a paid subscriber, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have access to all the overtimes. I think we shouldn't have an overtime this time. It's a year-end issue, holiday spirit. But most podcasts do have that. Then there's the paid print content in the Non-Zero newsletter. And then there's the joy of knowing that you're supporting us. Who would not be uplifted by the knowledge that they're supporting us, Andrew? Can you think of
Right.
anyone?
I can't. And I'll say the newest episode that has an overtime segment on psychedelics and meditation was very good.
Did you like it?
I actually haven't listened to the overtime segment yet, but when we were driving to Alabama for Christmas, we listened to the public portion. And actually, I meant to tell you, I tried this thing of when meditating,
Taking
focusing.
psychedelics while driving?
No, not this time. But no, focusing on my breath during the inhale and then on
Sound in the
auditory.
exhale, the Bob
Yeah.
technique. Yeah.
I didn't have the psychedelic effects that you experienced. But
This
it
was a one-time event on my
Yeah.
first meditation retreat, but go ahead.
But it was a nice experience. I'm gonna continue to do that.
No, different things work for different people.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, well, I'm glad. Well, the overtime segment of that is wild. But we get into her experience with 5-MeO, the exotic form of DMT, which is not like other forms of DMT, and it is supposed to have the capacity to give you a true, not self experience, ego death, and she got there. So yeah, that we just was that posted last night?
I think
Should
so.
have been, right?
I listened to the early access version, which is also something that paid
Another thing you
subscribers
get for being okay. Hierarchy of needs. If you don't do that, become a paid subscriber of the Non-Zero newsletter and rate and review us. Smash, or if you're watching on YouTube, smash the like button, like on all our podcasts, just like as a ritual. Or no, wait until like if after 2 or 3 minutes you think it's not that bad, then smash the like button.
Leave a comment. Hopefully a comment that
Yeah.
doesn't involve saying that Mickey is more interesting to listen to than I am. That'd be nice.
Yeah, don't say that. Don't say that. Andrew has this fragile ego. You know, his whole generation is soft.
Snowflakes.
If I told you, it's like snowflakes.
Yeah.
It's like Andrew is this close to melting. And if one more person says, "Where's Mickey?" It's
It
gonna
hits
be
me every time.
right. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's look, and who does the cleanup? Who spends an hour on therapy for you every week, Andrew? Tell them.
That's you behind the scenes.
That's me. That's me.
Mhm.
So, folks, take it easy on both of us. If you want to know where Mickey is, ask Mickey. He's on Twitter. Ask him. So anyway, final hierarchy of needs. It's not non-paid subscriber and rate and review and smash the like button. It's do one of those, at least one of those. Or all three,
Good.
which would be better. Okay. So that's our message to you. And we will see you in the new year. And thanks to everybody who has listened this far. You're doing God's work.
See you later,
and
Bob.
Andrew, have a safe and sane New Year's Eve. Never drive while taking psychedelics.
That's
Okay.
true. Yeah, I'm glad you added that.
Yeah.
Okay. Happy holidays. Happy New Year.
All
Good
right.
talking to you.
You too.
Bye.